Hey friends, this is Mark Suroviec, host of the Workplace Solutions podcast, inviting you to discover the joy of work. All right, and we're on. How you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing well.
Fantastic. How, it's a gorgeous day, and I heard you just scored yourself a deer recently. Is that true?
I did. I scored a nice doe yesterday up in Dalton, and it was a whole lot of fun. Took all day to find her walking by, but it worked out.
Today, I am here with Dr. Chris Auger, who is a team and leader performance coach and retired U.S. Navy SEAL. I did learn that there is no such thing as a former SEAL when I first met Chris, but a retired one. And Chris, what are we talking about today?
I believe we're going to be talking about self-awareness.
That is absolutely correct. So on this podcast, we will answer the questions, what is self-awareness? Why is it so vital? How can I be more self-aware? And we'll also get to hear plenty of stories from Chris, who is a super interesting person who is much more than his doctorate, much more than his former SEALness, and just a very interesting person. So I'm excited about today. How you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. I look forward to this. I've been thinking about some of the questions and how to put that together today.
Okay. So as we do always, we're going to start off with an icebreaker. So Chris, since you are a retired military professional, answer this question. Who would win in a fight between Captain Crunch and Tony the Tiger?
I'm going to go with Tony the Tiger.
Why is that?
I think Tony the Tiger would just rip his throat out.
Okay. That just got super graphic real quick, and and we're laughing, and it's good. And so, as you can guess, Chris was not prepared for that question.
It was an honest answer.
It was an honest answer. Okay. All right, Chris. Normally I answer my own icebreaker question, but that I'm good. I'm good. All right, so let's talk about today's topic of self-awareness. But before we do, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey. How did you get to where you've been to where you are now? And know that we're talking the shorter version of the story, because I know you have so much life experience. You could talk for hours on that, just even your own history.
I did almost 28 years. I was about a week shy of 28 years in the military. I hit a point after 12 years of enlisted and almost 16 years as an officer that my spinal surgeon said it was time to do something different. And basically after 2 neck surgeries and a bad lower back, it was time to choose to do something else. So I retired from the military in about 2015. And then in the process of retiring, I looked at my wonderful bride and said, I'm going to go back to school. And she's like, your undergrad and your grad didn't go so well. I don't know that I really want you to go back to school. And I was like, well, with all that time on my hand, I'm going to need a hobby. And she's like, I'm not going to be your hobby in retirement. And I basically said, well, then I should probably go back to school. And no, I don't want you to go to school. Well, then you get to be my hobby. And then she finally said, go back to school. So I went back to school to get a doctorate in strategic leadership from Regent University. And the key reason for doing that is where my back was at the time. It was a method to be able to teach at the highest level possible. To teach at the doctorate and the PhD level, you need to have a doctorate. And that afforded me the opportunity to be able to do that in an online program and be able to navigate my back where it was at the time. From there, my daughter fell in love with a gentleman down here in Douglasville, in Georgia.
Yes, Georgia. Mm-hmm.
And we were up in Virginia at the time, and my beautiful bride said, how come she gets 2 and I get none, referring to the new mother-in-law. And I translated that to, hey, let's go to Atlanta and go on an adventure. So we moved after 2 years of moving from California to Virginia. We moved down to Atlanta and then found a house, bought the house, and then my current position as a leadership coach, I found 4 months later, and it's about 2 hours away from where we bought a house. So we moved again in 2 years. A lot of life transitions I wouldn't recommend to everybody. Doing 5 or 6 major life transitions inside of a couple-year period was not a healthy thing for me and the bride. But we managed to get through it and navigate it well, and here we are today living the dream, just being able to pour into others and walk with others, serve them and help them on their journeys to significance in his kingdom. So it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Fantastic. And just as you know, Chris, a majority of our listeners are not from a faith background or followers of Jesus. And so we're talking to a very diverse audience. Feel free to still talk about your faith, but I just want to remind us on that because we want folks to be, we want them to know that this is a safe place for them to listen to the podcast as well.
Absolutely.
Cool? All right. If you hear some background noise, Chris's wonderful dog is in the recording studio here with us. Who's your dog?
His name is Winston. He is a Jack Russell Pig mix, so we call him a Jug. He came to us through a rescue in San Diego. He was supposed to be my daughter's dog. Now, mind you, we had a Belgian Shepherd for 13 years, and he lived a good life, and we had to put him down. And then a couple years later, I get a call when I'm on a work trip, and they're basically signing the paperwork as they're asking me, can we get a dog? And I come home, and after about 10 minutes, my daughter was extremely upset with me and ran upstairs crying, and I'm like, what's the matter? And my wife was like, you know what you did. And I was like, what did I do? She was supposed to be his human. It's obvious that's not the case. And but he's been with me through 2 neck surgeries, 2 shoulder surgeries, a minor stroke, a myriad of medical issues. And he's just basically my swim buddy and companion, sits with me in the morning in quiet time. He's just a good dog.
Fantastic.
Great companion, lousy watchdog.
He did not bark when I drove up this morning.
No, he did not.
Oh, man, that's great. And shout out to your wonderful daughter who is now a mother.
Yes.
And which makes you a grandfather.
Yes, it does. I'm Pawpaw, and my bride is Lala, and it is a strange situation watching your baby have a baby and be a mom, and she's doing so well at it.
My oldest daughter is 9, so I think I've got some time.
You have some. Not as much as you think.
Oh, don't even say that. Don't even say that. That sounds terrible. Oh, man.
It goes by quick.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's go ahead and get into today's topic a little bit. I love Chris, and if I don't say it later, I want to say it now. Thank you for your service. We appreciate it. I know every year on all of the military-themed holidays, I try to text you and thank you because I'm very appreciative, and I know that's been a big sacrifice with your body and just all that time. So thank you for that.
No, I appreciate that. It's always a odd thing when you run into veterans and you thank them for their service. There may be that little awkward pause. And generally that's because most of us really loved what we did. So it's weird to get thanked for what you did, but you can never really hear it enough. So there are those moments where it's just like, hey, thank you for everything you did. And it's like, I was paid to do what I loved to do. It was a blast. In some cases, literally. It's encouraging to hear that from folks, especially young folks that may not have the exposure to patriotism the way that a lot of us have in the last few years.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And let's talk about some self-awareness. So, Chris, can you give us a working definition of self-awareness? And this is, as you know, our audience is made up of kind of very diverse people, some folks from an experiential learning background, some folks not from that background, because we want to speak to anyone who has a group of people that is trying to help them reach their goals. So tell us, not the academic definition, but kind of a working definition that we can work with today.
I like to equate it to emotional intelligence.
Okay.
And the idea behind emotional intelligence, it's how well do we know what's happening in our heart and our head? How well do we express that with our body language, our eyes, our tone of voice? How we create relationships with that information? And then how do we manage problems and manage stress? And then the idea behind that is that how do we use that information in an appropriate and accurate way? And a lot of that comes to the idea of we gain information at how we react or respond to certain situations because we react emotionally, but we respond very cognitively. When I understand what's happening inside my heart and head and how well I actually use that to communicate, so people walking up to me, oh, that's Chris's happy face. I understand where he's at right now. I'm projecting a good image. that they know is accurate and appropriate for the situation, then the relationship is based on something a little more accurate. Then we're allowed to solve problems together and manage the right kind of stress. But if I'm so problem-solving oriented that I forget to actually display what's happening, I mean, a great example of this is that at church in San Diego, I would greet people, and then my wife would ask me later, "Are you mad at so-and-so?" "I don't know so-and-so." "Well, they think you're mad at them." Well, the thing about it is that in my heart and head, I'm greeting them. I don't typically convey a lot of emotion. So there's just kind of a blankness that I had to own, but they would fill in the blank. And then they didn't know how to fill it in accurately, so typically they'd go to the worst case. "Oh my goodness, he's angry with me." So having the self-awareness that I have a tendency to be very stoic, how do I create the body language that matches what's happening in my heart and head to be able to communicate on an interpersonal level in an accurate and appropriate way for the moment?
I think something you just said there is worth noting. In the absence of a story, people tend to fill in that story with something else. Yeah. And if you are a leader or a manager or in any responsible role or position of influence, if no information doesn't mean no information, it means stuff gets created.
Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're following, leading, teaming, whether at work, whether at home with your family. I mean, some of the biggest dust-ups between my bride and I have been because I created the blank and she filled it in, given my body language. My favorite question to hear is, "Are you okay?" Well, I was 30 seconds ago, but obviously my body language is telling you something different. So maybe I'm not okay. At least I was. Now I'm not. So I have to own the fact that my self-awareness, how am I projecting what I know to be true in my heart and my head? Again, there's that whole idea of being able to put it into action in an appropriate and accurate way so that we're feeding people the information they need to then engage us in a more productive and effective way.
So let's talk a little bit about why it's so vital. I've read in multiple places that self-awareness is the meta skill of being an adult professional, that it's sometimes even described as a superpower, and that is obviously a little bit of hyperbole, but kind of walk us through a little bit about why this is so important.
Let me give you a great example with my daughter. Back in 2012 in the SEAL community, I discovered that we could give assessments, and the idea was to give assessments early and often, and every couple of years, coach the SEALs on what they learned about themselves in the assessments. Now, that program didn't take off, but what I did learn about myself is that I scored pretty low in empathy. And I'm thinking, I've got plenty of empathy. And then I go home to my bride and my daughter, and I say, this assessment scores me very low on empathy, and I think I've got empathy. And my wife starts laughing, and my daughter spitting her drink out her nose, and it's just like, and I'm like, interesting. Okay, do tell, because obviously I'm not seeing something here, so major blind spot on my part. And my wife just looks at me, she's like, "Do you want an example of your empathy?" And I was like, uh-oh. I know the voice, I know the look, and it was coming. And I was like, okay, give it to me. And she's like, "What did you say to your daughter when she came home with the 88 on the test that you helped her study for 3 days?" Now, knowing myself, I'm a high D, results-oriented, learner achiever on the strengths finders.
And high D is referencing the DISC profile.
Yes, it's very challenge and results oriented. And I'm, inside of my heart and my head, I'm thinking, man, I know how she would have felt if she'd have gotten that 90 something, because I knew she had the information nailed cold. But what was my reaction? What happened to the other 12 points? Yeah. So my wife is like, I rest my case. Now, what my daughter...
I'm not a rock star in empathy, and I can go...
Yeah, it's cringeworthy, because what my daughter heard is, you failed, you're not good enough. She heard all the wrong things, filling in all the blanks. But my heart and head was for her, and I was her biggest champion, and I wanted her to get that great grade because she did work so hard for it. What she really needed to hear is, I know how hard you studied for that. I was with you, and I know how much of that you knew. It's okay. I understand that you can't take, not that you can't take tests, but you struggle taking tests well. And that was on me to own that. And I was just like, wow. So empathy, appropriate and accurate for the moment. That was a miss on my part in that particular instance. So it was like learning the aspect of part of self-awareness, which one component of that is empathy, being able to see something from somebody else's perspective and not only see it, but understand how they're feeling and even feel a little bit of that, not sympathy, but empathy. Just because we have empathy for a follower or a teammate or a leader doesn't mean we have to take on their burdens. But as long as we can actually see it from their perspective and take that into consideration, that's a very, very powerful set of information that we can then be informed by and then use to make better decisions in the moment.
Tell us a story about a blind spot that you or someone close to you had. What happened and how did you or that person overcome it?
I think a great blind spot for me was when I became the executive officer at the Center for SEAL and SWCC, which was the leader development and the career management program for enlisted in the SEAL community and the Special Warfare Combatant Crewman community inside of Naval Special Warfare. And as the XO, I had inadvertently trained my staff, my directors, to come to the department head meeting or the director meeting on a weekly basis unprepared. They just sat there and waited because they knew I was going to tell them what to do, when to do. I was going to give them all 5 W's. And essentially it was because I had looked at all the problems and thought I had the solution. And then after getting a DISC assessment, after getting the EQI, I realized very quickly that I had trained my staff to not think, but to just wait for me to tell.
And EQI is another emotional intelligence assessment, is that correct?
Yes, it's the emotional quotients inventory from Multi-Health Systems.
Okay, perfect.
And it's 5 composites with 15 subscales, and it's how all of them play in the pool together.
Okay. So finish, or not finish your story. Continue on. So you've taken this group of people and did all the thinking for them.
Well, when I was getting certified in the instrument, the EQI, Nadler. Now, what's funny is that his first name, Reldan, is his last name spelled backwards. His dad did that to him on purpose. So,
oh man,
Relly basically gave me he processed my DISC or my EQI in a way for about 45 minutes. And then at dinner, he's like, Chris, come on over here. I'm going to give you a 5-minute laser coaching session and it's going to change your world. It's like, okay. So I walked over to him and he's like, so for 45 minutes, I processed your assessment with you. And for 45 minutes, I looked at the exact same face. You didn't flinch. You didn't shrug your shoulders. You didn't move your eyebrows. You didn't give me an uh-huh or a or a grunt or a smile or anything. In fact, I thought you were just disinterested in getting certified in the instrument. And I looked at Relly and just said, I was processing. I was thinking. He's like, yeah, but I didn't know that. So I didn't think you were interested in the instrument. So what I realized is that I have a very stoic nature. So I had some self-awareness and that I had a tendency to show up with the answers and not ask good questions. So when I went back to the office, the first director meeting I had, sat on my hands and bit my tongue, gave some body language and some cues that I was hearing people. I asked a couple of questions that amplified the information. And that kind of gave everybody pause. They're like, what's wrong with the XO? It was just one of those things. They weren't used to that kind of a guy showing up to the table. Now, mind you, in my office, my desk was always clean. But when people started coming to see me, I turned my monitor so that they could see them. Now, how many people have gone to meet with someone and it's your meeting with them, but the entire time they continue doing their email or answering texts or doing something of that nature? Okay, that's a blind spot on their part. I wanted to make sure I didn't do that to people because it's not very validating or valuing. So when they came in, I'd make the production to turn off and power off the monitors. Silence my phone, put it in the desk, silence the desk phone, pull out a piece of paper and a pen, put that on there and be present and present. Now that freaked some people out the first few times they came to my office and said, okay, so what's up? For me to communicate to them, it was if it's important for them to come to the office, then it's important for me to be present. I owed them that. Mm-hmm. I owed them the ability to remove any obstacles that were mine to own. Now, that's not to say I was going to take any of their monkeys. They're theirs. Mm-hmm. I've got my own. I didn't need theirs and mine, so I would give their monkeys back to them and let them handle that. But if it was an obstacle or a barrier that kept them from soaring, mm-hmm. that was mine to own and remove so that they could do the job that I needed them to do. And the process of identifying that blind spot, I never realized how much my folks were capable because I had always tried to give them the answers thinking I was helping them. The real journey was, how do I challenge them to come up with more solutions, better solutions, use the time, talent, skills, and experiences that they have to come to the table with good solutions. And that was very, very powerful for my leadership journey to realize, wow, I'm not as smart as, or as experienced, or as educated as everybody in the room is. So once I garnered that and used that information, they showed me stuff that I didn't know, and they were taking programs and projects to new levels that I never thought could be possible.
That's fantastic. And if you are in a position of leadership or influence, we do recommend that if you're going to change your behavior, tell people.
Warn people. It's effective to warn people.
Yeah, it's helpful to get, this is what I am trying to do. This is why I am doing this differently. And the other thing that does is it does give people, folks often give you more grace when they know you're trying, when they know you're vulnerable, when they know you have not arrived. So if you're going to change and you're trying to improve, tell them and they can join you in that change. So I love
Absolutely.
That story. All right. Is it all right with you if I share one of mine?
Go for it.
Thinking back, there was a season in my career where I had been placed on a leadership team. It was the first time in my professional career that I was on a leadership team, and I don't know where the slide started, but at some point I stopped doing some of the things that got me there, thinking of others first and being servant-hearted, and just kind of put some mental distance between me and the folks lower, and I worked myself off of that team. And it was when I was told I was not on that team anymore, it was a big shock, and it shouldn't have been. I should have seen the writing on the wall, but I had no idea. So that caused me to really go through this 6, 8, 10 month process of really examining, well, how self-aware am I really? If I had that big of a surprise that I would be removed from a position without knowing it was coming, then I've got a major blind spot somewhere. So had a lot of very humbling conversations with folks following that to say, hey, how is our relationship? How are we interacting? And in conversations with my supervisor at that time, I remember going like, when did you give me the feedback? He's like, I've been giving the feedback the whole time. And clearly, however he said it and however I was receiving it were way different. And yeah, since he's not here to defend himself, I'll own as much of that as I can. But
good approach.
Good. It was hard, and I was incredulous at the time because it's like, how am I not self-aware? I know DISC and StrengthsFinder and Enneagram and all these things, all my profiles, and yet I wasn't aware of how some of my interactions were interpreted, and folks didn't know I cared about them and didn't know that the task-oriented thing that they saw was that there was a heart behind it as well. So I think of that season, and it sucked. Like I hated it. I would never want to go through that again. I don't think I'm telling that story well, but that's fine. We'll move on.
Well, no, I think what you bring up is a good point. First off, my approach to leadership is that, if I were to sit here and look at you and say, I'm a pretty humble guy, aren't I?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that would come across as pretty arrogant.
Yeah.
You're like, and when I talk to new coachees and they look at me and I'm looking at them laugh, and it comes across as that. So if I say I am a leader, that's a pretty bold statement because the assumption is that leadership has occurred. Now, do we get to evaluate and say that? I mean, we can say we're a supervisor, we can say we're a manager, we can say we're in charge, but to say we're a leader, that's a bold statement. That comes from the people that there's evidence of actually having led. They're the one that give us that title and get to call us the leader, or he's the project lead, or he leads us. And when we take on that moniker of earning that on a daily basis, one day you can be a hero and the next day you're a zero and you're owing a 3-part apology. And it's just one of those ways that when we put into context, we earn that leadership moniker daily. That's pretty powerful. And there's the identity that we get from assessments, but then there's the reputation we have with others.
Oh, that's good.
And the only true way we actually come to what the truth is to ask for feedback from more than one source. And we ask for feedback from people that we know that truly care about us, know us, and want to help us become better. That's the kind of feedback that we can trust and we're willing to take action on. Not all feedback is good.
Yeah.
It just, even from a boss,
Yeah.
It just, wow, you totally missed everything I was trying to do for you and champion this organization. And that saddens me. That happens. But when we start asking for that feedback, Johari's window, the 4 quadrants that are out there, 2 guys, Joe and Harry, came together to make Johari's window. To ask for feedback is to create and ask for and open the doorway for information to come in that's not known by you, but known by others. If you know something and do something a particular way, it's good for you to let others know that. For years, my wife and I would have blowouts about financial discussions. And I got from her, you don't trust me, you don't think I've looked at this, you don't think I'm making a smart decision. She had a financial hot button. Well, when she was growing up, there were a couple of bad situations where her family was homeless. And for her, finances were a big deal, but I didn't know that. But once she told me that, it changed how I approached her about things and garnered that trust in what we were doing. And I had better awareness of how to approach her about major decisions.
So her self-awareness communicated to you allowed you to be more self-aware of what was going on in you and her.
Absolutely. Back to identity and reputation. That's a two-way street because I have a reputation with others and I have an identity that I've been able to detail through assessments and all this information. But then that flips when it's the other person. They have a reputation with me and they have an identity in their own mind. Somewhere in the middle is truth. And it's just good to be aware of that. And how do we act on it? To be, again, the goal with how we lead, team, and follow is how do we show that level of care, that level of knowing, and that level of helping one another become better to add value.
I love that. That is a good place to pause. We're going to pause part 1 of our conversation with Dr. Chris Auger, team and leadership development coach and retired Navy SEAL. And we will pick it up with part 2. Life is way too short for work to suck. So if you want help to build your team, train your team, or manage your team, we're here. Come see us at workplaysolutions.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Tell us a story about a blind. We can edit that stuff out.